Perfect. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much for all of the wonderful news from Michaels. Hey, everybody, I'm Chris Williams, and here in the Plaid Craft Studios, I have Caitlin Smith with me here this evening. She's going to be helping me moderate tonight's class. So if you have any questions, like we said before, go ahead and type them in the chat, and either Caitlin will answer them or do her best to relay them to me. We're going to have a great time tonight. We're going to paint fast tonight. If you don't happen to be a fast painter, by all means, please take your time and paint as much as you can along with me as you can. You'll have the recording to follow up with tomorrow to paint at your own ease and continue your painting that perhaps you might not be able to paint along with me tonight. I painted my original Patriotic Daisies on a 10 by 10 canvas panel. It just is easier for me to store artwork. And of course, you could easily drop it into a frame by doing it on a canvas panel. But you could, of course, use a stretched canvas of any width or depth that you might want to do, or place it on another piece of art or wood or another type of surface that you might like. But I'm working with a canvas panel tonight. My design has already been transferred, and I think there was a note in the supply list that it would be a good idea to go ahead and transfer your pattern as well. Let's go ahead and go overhead, because I'm going to go ahead and just jump right in there. Thank you so much. This was the downloadable pattern that was available for you in this class, and we had it tiled so that you could print it out on your home printer on 8.5 by 11 paper. And I gave you the pattern with just the heart and the stripes so that you could transfer your design onto your canvas with just the heart shape and the stripes. And then I also went ahead and transferred on mine the little stars. You didn't have to, but you could have transferred your stars. And then I only transferred on mine the daisy centers. And you can kind of see little odd-shaped ovals here and there. I did not transfer the entire design of all the intricate little leaves and the petals of my daisies. We're going to try and work around that and do that freehand. It may not turn out exactly like this, but it'll be very, very close. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And when I transferred my pattern, all I simply did, if you're new to decorative painting, is I put my pattern out onto a sheet of transfer paper or tracing paper. And then I use a product that is a graphite. It's a transfer paper. It's kind of like an artist carbon paper. And so what I did was I put the dark side of my transfer paper down onto the surface that I'm going to transfer my design with. Once I have my pattern in place, you sandwich this between the two. And then when I'm doing anything that is straight lines, I highly recommend using a ruler or a straight edge tool of some sort when you are transferring that design. You do want a fairly nice, long, straight line rather than just trusting your hand to draw straight lines. And then, of course, I transferred the shape of the heart. And like I said, I also put the little stars in the center and the odd-shaped ovals that would be representing our daisy ovals. So I would put my stripes on, my heart on, then I would place this on top, and I would transfer my stars, and then, like I said, just the daisy centers. And when I transfer using that transfer paper, the gray graphite, I use a tool that's called a stylus. This is an artist stylus. This is double-ended, and one side is very small, one side is a little bit larger, making a larger line, but that's what I use. If you don't have a stylus, a dead ballpoint pen would work the same. So let's just go ahead and jump into our project tonight, and I'm going to get a couple colors directly out onto my palette. If you're painting along with me, you'll want to do the same. So let's go ahead and add to our palette some Look at Me Blue. Look at Me Blue is a really nice medium blue color. It is not a deep blue. It's not a cobalt hue or a bright blue, an ultramarine blue. It's more of a medium blue. I'm going to add apple red. Apple red is a beautiful, gorgeous, almost like true red color. I absolutely love apple red. one of my favorite colors. And by the way, tonight I am using the FolkArt multi-surface line of paints. Multi-surface means just that. You can paint on a wide variety of surfaces, and it is gosh, it's wonderful to work with. It's full-bodied, it's rich in its consistency. It is non-toxic, it is water-based. It's made right here in Georgia in the USA. So I love the multi-surface paints, and we are going to go ahead and add the white to our palette as well. And the white I'm working with is Wicker white, but you could also use titanium white. So that's enough colors, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's get two more out. I'm going to also add to my list of colors a really rich burgundy color. This is like berry wine. If you don't have berry wine, you can go ahead and mix a deep burgundy color by adding a little bit of black to some apple red, and that will get you a nice burgundy. And let's see, I think I've got all my colors, maybe one more. Let's go ahead and get out on our palette. And that would be our deeper blue. And that is ink spot that we're going to work with tonight. If you don't have ink spot, probably Prussian blue would be a good alternative color. This is not quite as dark as Prussian blue, but you can see it's more navy compared to our like medium value blue here. Let's begin first by getting some color on our palette, and then we'll start working with some details. I'm going to use a larger brush to start out with. I'm using a 3/4 inch flat brush. And let's go ahead and just quickly get some red on the red stripes here. So when I'm painting the red stripes, and let's say, I don't know for sure if it's going to fall this way, but let's say this stripe right here happens to be a red stripe. And you can also see that I also have a daisy center here. If you fall into any of those areas, you can simply try and paint around that red, that daisy center, okay? I'm going to start at the top of my design, and I'm going to load my flat brush with the pure, beautiful red called apple red. So this is apple red, and let's go ahead and paint that starting at the top of our canvas. Every other alternating stripe is going to be red. So there's going to be a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 red stripes. All right, so everybody that's painting with me, load up your brushes with red and go ahead and get a nice, beautiful red stripe on your canvas.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay, Caitlin, shoot.
Susan wants to know if you can paint this on a 300 GSM paper. I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, Susan, I'm not 100% sure what that paper is either. I would say that if your paper will withstand acrylic paints, then yes, you can definitely do that.
Okay, and then I guess Judith didn't transfer the stars. What would you recommend her doing?
She can quickly do that now before she starts painting, or she can paint freehand stars or even put the stars in later.
Okay.
Either any of those suggestions might work for you, Judith.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great, Caitlin. Thank you for that. So there's one stripe painted, and I'm just going to continue doing every other line, like I said, with the red stripes. And when you're using your large flat brush, if it helps, use the chisel edge. So here's an example of what I'm doing. I'm using just that chisel edge of the brush, and I'm going to scoot that along my pattern line. And then I'm going to work around a daisy here. And then when I come to the top of that square, or well, it's kind of a square now, but it's really a stripe, I can use that chisel edge again and just go right along that line. And that's going to help me get a nice straight line. And then I can come back and fill that in with the flat of the brush. So don't hesitate to use the chisel edge of your brush along these nice straight lines, okay? I wonder how many of you are painting along with me tonight. I hope a good many are. This is coming up really close here in the United States to, I know some of our friends are from Canada and perhaps even other countries, but here in the US, we're getting really close to our Memorial Day weekend. A lot of people here in the United States will decorate with red, white, and blue. They'll put up banners and maybe yard signs with red, white, and blue, maybe wreaths on the front door. This piece would even be cute worked up into a wreath.
Judith has one more question.
Sure.
If she didn't transfer the circles for the daisy centers, can she add it later? And will it
Yes.
go on
Oh,
top of the red?
we could do the daisies 100% freehand. That's not a problem at all.
Okay.
This is going to be a free and easy kind of painting class tonight. We're not going to worry. We're not going to stress. We're just going to have a really good time. Okay, so here's my second one. And you can see on this side right here of the heart, the upper right of the heart, and then here towards the left of this hump, and then over here in the middle of the red, there were three kind of oval shapes to represent my daisies centers. And so you can see I just kind of left them very rough. We're going to come back and create those daisy centers. So don't worry about any of that at all. We're just going to put our stripes on real quickly, and then we're going to move on. So if, as you can, let that chisel edge of that brush do the work for you on these long straight lines. The key is making sure that you have enough paint loaded in your brush and put that brush to work for you. Turn your work as you need to. You see, probably if you are watching me tonight, I turn my work quite often to kind of get the right angle so I can get just the best spot to fill it in with that color. And so I am doing that all along. I'm using the chisel edge of my brush. I'm working around those ovals that are going to be our daisy centers. And if you're painting along with me and you're using apple red, surely by now you have seen that this is such a beautiful bright red color. This is one of my favorites. I always use apple red whenever I'm painting anything that needs to have some red accents to it. Love this on my Santa Clauses and holiday designs that I paint. Apple red is such a beautiful color. And I'm going to continue along on my bottom stripe here around a daisy center that's off to the side. If any of you are not painting with me tonight and you are just simply watching and perhaps even taking notes, good for you. You know that the Michaels classes are available to you on Michaels' YouTube channel. Usually they're posted like the very next day. So feel free to watch and take notes if you want to tonight, and then paint along at your leisure with the replay, with the recording. The corner of my canvas got smack dab into the blue here, so I need to wipe the paint off my hands and off the corner of this canvas. There we go. And I've only got a couple more red stripes to do myself. It's best to use a nice large brush when you are painting. There's no sense trying to do a large space like this, just using like maybe a number 12 or even a number 8 flat brush. Use as large a brush as you can, because you're going to find that the work will go a lot easier and quicker. And I'm on my last red stripe. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to set my brush down for just a moment, and then I'm going to quick pick up a hair dryer that I have off to the side here, our heat tool, and I am going to go ahead and dry mine real quick. Okay, how's everybody doing? I'm going to scoot on to the next step. If you're happen to still be painting a little stripe, continue on, or just paint a few stripes tonight, and you can always paint the balance. If you want to paint at a slower pace, you can always paint a few more after you let a couple of them get finished tonight. So I'm going to rinse my brush real quick because I now want to come in and put some color here on the center of our heart. So I'm going to make sure that all of that red gets out of my brush right now. So I'm really rinsing it well in our container of water. I'm going to blot it really well. And the center of our heart is a light blue, but it's even a lighter blue than what we have here as our Look at Me blue. So I'm going to use both Wicker White and the Look at Me blue together in the same large flat brush that we did our red stripes with. So when we look at this center here, it's mostly a light blue / white here in the center of our heart. And then it's a darker blue around the outside edge of our heart. So what we're going to do is just kind of get that blue color in. And if by chance you transferred some of your daisy centers and some do fall inside the heart, we can work around those. If you transferred your stars, we can work around those. If you did not, then you have a nice clean canvas to just go ahead and fill in a whole heart shape. I'm going to start my brush first with some white. So after I cleaned the apple red out of my flat brush, I'm now loading it with white, full flat, both sides. Then I'm going to stroke into the full flat of the brush into our blue. So I have a brush that has both white and blue in my bristles of the brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and fill in, and I'm doing kind of what we call a slip slap. I'm not worrying about getting a nice smooth texture. I am actually trying to create a little bit of texture, and I am just filling in that heart shape from the center all the way out to the edges, using again that chisel edge to be my workhorse and get that shape in there. As I said, if you had already transferred shapes of stars, or if you have transferred your daisy centers and they're falling here inside the center, go ahead and work around them.
And Chris, what colors can they use again instead of Look at Me blue and Thicket?
If we didn't do Look at Me blue, any medium value blue would work. You could even, if all you have is perhaps cobalt hue or an ultramarine, a more brilliant blue, you could actually make a little puddle of a medium value blue just by mixing white with it off to the side.
And then what about Thicket?
And Thicket is a nice dark green color, almost like a sap green. We are going to use a dark green and a very, very bright green for when we get to the green part. So any bright yellowy green color, we used lime green on our supply list. So anything that's kind of like a citrus green, a lime green, a happy green, any of those greens would work for the lighter value. And the darker value, I would say Thicket or sap green would work.
Thank you.
Thank you for the passing all those colors combinations along with to me, Caitlin.
No problem.
All right, so you could see if you're watching, I just constantly pick up a little bit more white. I pick up a little bit more of the blue. I'm just brush mixing here on my canvas as I apply the paint. I'm not really worrying about keeping my color smooth. I do want to see a little texture. I want to see a little movement between the colors. And I'm just kind of like slip slapping it on, if you will. Some areas will be brighter and whiter because there is more white in your brush when you're brushing it on. Other areas might be a little bit more blue because of the blue that you're putting in. Just kind of get the color on. We're not being fancy about this. Working carefully. Again, use that chisel edge. Let that be your workhorse tonight. Get used to using that brush, especially if you have stars transferred and you're going around the stars, as I happen to be now in a little cluster here at the bottom of the heart. Let that chisel edge be your guide to paint around the sharp angles of your stars. And coming back up the side here, again, just use that chisel edge to kind of create those straight lines. Now, as you are painting, and we're doing this fairly quickly tonight, if you're painting along, let's say you get a little bit of the red stripe into maybe what might be a white stripe, or a little bit of the blue of the heart that we're painting now on top of one of your white stripe areas, or even if it got out onto the red that you've already painted. Absolutely no worries. Like I said, this is going to be a carefree painting tonight. We have the design of our daisies and our leaves that are going to go right on this border here. So if your border is irregular, your shape has gotten a little bit out of whack maybe, don't worry. This is a don't worry painting night tonight, y'all. We're going to have fun, and the pattern of our daisy flowers and the pattern of adding a little bit more to our stripes is just going to take over, and you're not going to worry about any detail that might not be perfect on the edges. Matter of fact, it's probably better if it's not perfect on the edges. Okay, I think I've got mine pretty much covered in. Kind of slip slappy. You can see it's kind of very textured, dark in some areas, light in others. I came close as I could to some of my stars. My stars will get redefined in a little bit, but I'm pretty happy with where I am. And I also went around some irregular daisy center kind of oval round shapes here. So I'm good with that. Before we put this brush away, I do want us to go ahead and darken this outside edge here in our heart. So our brush is going to be on the heart, but we're going to create that darker blue, like almost a halo, if you will, inside the heart shape. So with that brush loaded with just the mixture that we had, I'm going to side load into our darkest blue that we put on the palette. This again was my ink spot. And I mentioned that if you didn't have ink spot, any dark, like navy blue color would be good. You could even use the Prussian blue that we use so much. Any dark, really beautiful blue, you can see how dark that is here on the palette. I've just stroked into that puddle of color, and I'm kind of blending this like used dirty brush with my dark blue. And I'm going to have a brush that's loaded to where I've got dark blue on one side, and it's going to gradually go across to that brush mix of the white and look at me blue on the other side. Keeping the dark side of that brush, the side that has the ink spot in it, I'm now going to come along, keeping that right on the outside edge of my heart. I'm patting. I'm just putting that brush down flat, and it's short, choppy little strokes. And I'm just patting that color on, just lightly blending it. Stop and reload your brush when you feel like you need more blue paint. And just come along that outside edge. Now remember what I just told you earlier. So much of your design is going to be covering where the blue heart meets the stripes. So if you get a little messy on the outside edge here, don't worry, because our painting is going to go right over on top of that.
I have a fun little question.
Yeah.
If they didn't want to do patriotic colors, what color combinations do you think would look good with those daisies?
Oh gosh, daisies would look good against anything. Doing greens would be real pretty. Doing blues would be pretty. You could even change the color of your daisies. We did white daisies, but gosh, pink daisies or pastel color daisies would be really pretty. So you could just kind of play with this design and do whatever you like. I know that seemed kind of vague, but gosh, you could. You literally could do so many different color combinations. Keep going around your heart, the center of your heart with your darker blue. I'm going around my daisy centers too. And this is just short, choppy little patty strokes. I'm just patting that color on as I work around my heart. And I'm going to now start working up the other half of my heart. I've got half of mine kind of covered. And your red stripe should be drying pretty well, easy for you to work around and hang on to your surface. If your red is still a little wet, be careful. This blue that we're putting on now is very rich and very intense. And I think it just kind of helps add to our little design. Okay. And we are almost around the edge of our heart. I'm going to clean my brush when I finish with mine here. Just short, choppy, patty little strokes, just to kind of get a little color on the inside of our heart. And I'm going to clean that brush. We're going to go back to our red stripes real quickly. And we're going to also do the white stripes real quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and I've cleaned the darker blue out of my brush. I'm going to load my brush with just the Wicker white to start with. And we're going to work on our white stripes. So if everyone's with me, I'm loading that 3/4 inch flat brush with our Wicker white. And then what I'm going to do is tip a little corner into our lighter of the two blues. That's our Look at Me blue. So I've got a brush that's primarily all white across the flat of the brush and just a little bit of our Look at Me blue. I'm blending on the palette to make sure that color is softened and really pretty. And I'll show you on our finished sample. What we're going to do is you can turn your piece sideways. And when you look at each of the white stripes here at the bottom of the stripe all the way across, we're going to add that blue. So there's blue shading at the bottom of the white stripe. So as we begin our white stripes, and maybe start with a little section if that's easier for you, short, choppy little strokes, just pull that white and that blue across the bottom of that stripe. And you'll do the same thing with all of the other white stripes. They're primarily white, but they have a little bit of that Look at Me blue blended on the bottom of that stripe. So we're almost kind of base coating that stripe white at the same time we're adding the shading of the Look at Me blue. And I am just going with a full flat of the brush across the width of the length of that stripe. And I am just constantly retracing my steps to blend that out across the stripe here. All right, I'm going to add white as I need more white, add a little Look at Me blue, but I'm going to constantly blend that well on my palette before I take it to my canvas. And just keeping going, working as many white stripes as you can tonight. We're going to go ahead and try and get them all done. As I said, if you enjoy painting at a slower pace, by all means, I want you to work at your comfort level. Maybe don't paint quite as fast and work at your comfort level to where you have time to finish yours after tonight's class or even tomorrow. You'll always have the replay to be able to watch it. And I am almost done with my white stripes. There's a tiny little section, don't forget this, up at the corner at the top of the heart where the two little humps kind of meet down in the middle. So you don't want to forget that. There's a little bit, almost like a little V section yet showing. So you want to go ahead and put a little bit of color in that area too. Okay, I've got white, white and my Look at Me blue at the bottom of each of my white stripes. And I'm going to add that little V-shaped area that I was talking about. Put a little bit of blue in there and mostly our white. And then I'm going to clean this brush one more time, and we're going to do a little trim on these red stripes. Then we'll go straight to our daisies and our greenery. And the daisies don't take long to paint at all. So I cleaned out my brush from the white and blue mixture, excuse me. And now what I'm going to do is load that brush back with our apple red. So again, both sides of the brush with apple red. And then I'm going to side load into this beautiful burgundy color. That's our berry wine. So we're going to side load into the berry wine. I'm loading that brush, and now I'm going to blend on the palette. So we're going to end up with a brush that has mostly apple red in it with a little bit of that burgundy color, that beautiful berry wine on just a little section of that brush.
Do you think it would be nice if they used brown instead of the wine color?
They could use brown. They could even use black with the red and kind of create a burgundy color.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So now what we're going to do with this color, keeping the darker side, the burgundy side, towards the bottom of the stripe, just like we put the blue at the bottom of the white stripes, we're going to come in here and put the burgundy at the base. And you'll see it here on the finished sample here. Let me bring it up so you can see this close. There is burgundy at the bottom of the red stripes. So we're going to just refill our brush with the red, with the burgundy. And again, I do short, choppy little strokes as you work your way across the length of the stripe. Red and the burgundy, the berry wine. If you don't have berry wine, any burgundy color, like I said, you could even mix the color. You could use a brown with red to mix and get a burgundy. You could also use black with a red to get a burgundy. Sometimes sap green and red will kind of get you a deeper red color too. So there gives you some options. So we're just getting that burgundy on the bottom of the red stripe. And don't forget the middle stripe here. Some of this is going to peek through between your daisies and your leaves. Some of this might get a little bit covered up, but that's okay. It's just, you don't know at this point in time if you're going to end up covering some of this. So you want to have it sneaking through if it does show up. Just stop and reload your brush as often as you need to. I do quite often when I am painting. Always blend on the palette to make sure that you've got that loaded properly. And it makes it so much easier to paint when you have it loaded properly. And I'm almost done with my bottom stripe. Okay. I'm going to turn my work around and flip the brush around so that I can do the opposite side of my stripes here. Again, keeping burgundy to the bottom of the red stripe. Even just getting the heart and the stripes on is pretty, don't you all think? Even without the addition of the daisies. One more little section of the red and we'll be ready to start in on our daisies. Okay. All right, I'm going to set mine down and I'm going to clean out my brush. And one thing I wanted to tell with you or share with you again tonight too is we said that this was going to be a very carefree painting. Don't worry about if you get a little smudge on some of your stripes or maybe a little color went over to the side. We're not going to worry because of the next step of our daisies and our leaves. A lot of that is going to smooth out anything that you might feel is uneven. There's at the very, very end, if you look at the lines between the stripes here, I'm talking about this little jaggedy line right here at the top and the bottom of this stripe. That's all going to be done with our blue. So even if your stripes aren't 100% straight, we're going to come back and that little jiggity jaggedy line that we're going to paint on there is going to help calm down anything that might look like it's a little out of sorts. So this is going to be a very carefree and a very easy piece that we can easily fix if you feel like you need to do something. And it's not really fixing is not really the word, but if you want to make it a little bit different, maybe that's what I'm trying to think of. All right, so I just opened up Moon Yellow and I'm going to put a little Moon Yellow out onto my palette. That's going to be the color that we're primarily going to use for our daisy centers. So you'll want to get Moon Yellow out. If you don't have Moon Yellow, a medium yellow would be a good color to work with. I'm just wiping some paint off of my hands. And then we're also going to get out our greens. So if you have Thicket, go ahead and get Thicket out. And if you have lime green, go ahead and put a little bit of puddle of Thicket and lime green out onto your palette. If you do not have the Thicket, we already said you could use sap green. And your lime green is just any bright yellowy green color that you might have in your palette. And we're going to need white for our daisies. If you by chance have dirtied up your whole little puddle of white, you might want to get a little fresh puddle of white out. And that's all I'm going to add to my palette right now. So let's go ahead and begin with the daisy centers. I'm going to use a number 12 flat brush, and I'm just going to very quickly load my brush with the Moon Yellow. And I am going to use the flat of the brush and the corner of the brush and maybe even a little bit of the chisel edge of the brush. Depending upon the size and shape of your daisy centers, I'm just going to kind of put a little bit of yellow on the canvas. I'm not going to worry about trying to get that daisy center perfect. I'm just for now kind of getting little puddles of yellow, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre will work. Both of those would work. Cadmium yellow is a little bit brighter yellow, more like the color that we're working with today. Yellow ochre has a little bit more of a golden hue to it, but either one would be okay. So we're just kind of putting the yellow on the canvas. Like I said, don't worry about trying to make exact little ovals or little circles. We're just kind of filling in a little bit, getting that center on. We'll come back and we'll do some detail in these centers. But for now, this is going to be like our roadmap and tell us where our daisy petals are going to lead to. So we just want to get some yellow on. There we go. And I've got my yellow centers on. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that yellow out of my brush. And I'm going to do a daisy tonight. I'm going to bring mine up so you can see real closely. We'll do our daisies first, and then we'll sneak in little branches of greenery, little leaves of greenery wherever we can in between our daisies. Let's let our daisies be the heroes right for now. I'm going to use a round brush to do my daisy petals. And this is, I think, a number 3 round brush, maybe even a number, you can probably do anywhere from a 3 to a 6, maybe round brush. I am going to first start with our green, and I'm going to put lime green strokes down, working one daisy at a time. I'm going to put some lime green strokes, and I'm going to start from the outside edge of the petal, stroking in towards the center. I'll do a few here and I'll show you on mine. but I want you to see that underneath the white of the strokes, you see lime green. So I'm going to quickly put some lime green down. While the lime green is still wet, I'm just going to wipe the lime green out of my brush, pick up white, and stroke white petals on top of the green petals. And they could be exactly on top, or they can be a little bit off to the side, but we want that lime green to be a hint of color underneath those white daisies. So here's what I'm going to do here. And so I'll just go ahead and start with this one down here at the bottom. I'm going to start with lime green. This is, again, a round brush. And what I'm going to do when we look at the daisy center, here's our daisy. Well, it would help if this works. That one doesn't work. Will a pencil work? No. Here's our daisy center. I was going to draw a picture for you, but that didn't work. I'm going to start the daisy petal on the outside, stroking in towards the center. So I'm just going to take that round brush loaded with my lime green, and I'm going to touch down, put a little pressure on there, then pull lift. So it's a very quick little stroke, and I'm just touching, applying pressure, and pulling, lifting. And I'm going to keep turning my work around to work around in that circle. These daisy petals are not exact. You'll notice that there's gaps between them. Some of them are a little bit overlapping. These are very free-form daisies. So let's go ahead and do this one right here. And I am going to just, on top of my red, on top of my white, leading towards the yellow of our daisy centers, I'm just applying pressure when I first touch down and stroke towards the yellow. If I get a little bit of the tail of that stroke up into my yellow, it's okay, but try not to lead all the way up to the yellow. So what I'm going to do is quickly wipe that brush. Now I'm going to quickly load up with some white, and I'm going to pull that stroke on top of my green to the side of the green. Sometimes my colors will blend. Sometimes my white might be very thick. And I'm just going to keep adding daisy petals on top of the green. You can turn your work so that you're always pulling the strokes towards you if that's easier. Add some few extra daisy petals, more so than what you did with the green, and like maybe fill in. Here's an example. I've got two right here. I want to fill that gap a little bit. So I'm just going to push and pull another one in there. So you can have as many daisy petals as you want. The key thing to do is to not have them all the same distance apart, not have them all the same length either. When you look at a real daisy, like here's the one, I've got a shorter length petal here, and I got a longer one right next to it. I'll just restroke over that. So have different lengths in your petals too. But that's basically all I did with the daisy petals. We'll come back and we're going to accent the centers, but let's go ahead. Wipe that white out of the brush again. Let's pick up some lime green and quickly stroke in some lime green petals. Now, if your paint happens, let's say you live in a very arid climate, maybe you're sitting under a fan in your kitchen at your table, maybe your paints are just drying too quickly for you, that the green is not staying wet enough for you to come back and add that white on top. Just do a couple petals at a time. Try not to do the full daisy. And it could be too that maybe you're not putting enough paint in your brush. The more you paint, the more paint that's in your brush, the more the lime green is down on your canvas, the longer it's going to stay wet. Does that make sense? The more paint you have there, the longer it's going to take to dry. So it'll stay wet or fresher much longer than when you first paint something. So here's my second daisy. Now I can look at this and I can see some gaps, maybe some spaces. I'll start with some fresh white. Maybe I want to put a few more white strokes on top so that I have less green in my daisy. It's nice to have that as a background color, but maybe you don't want your daisy to look just like a green daisy. So add some white on top. You can always come back and add another daisy petal where you see like you might need one. When you're done with that one, just move on to the next one and just keep working at your daisies, putting a little bit of lime green down first and then overstroking with your white. And it's very, very quickly done once you kind of get the hang of it. It's about learning pressure. It's about learning how much brush stroke pressure you need. It's about learning how much paint to have in your brush at the same time. Turn your work as you feel comfortable. It's just simply a touch, press, lift, and drag it till you're right up to the tip of that round brush. And like I said, some of your white petals are going to be directly on top of the green. Some of them could go right next to them. And once you do a full daisy, then analyze your work and say, oh, I need a longer one here. I need a shorter one here. Maybe I've got too much of a gap between those two. I'm going to fill it in a little bit more. So it's very easy and quickly. You can see I've got 3 done already. It just moves along very, very quickly. So just keep on working. Your daisies can even be half daisies. They don't have to be really big, long petals. Some of yours should be even short little half daisies. And sometimes I will stroke, oh, maybe 3 petals all with one brush load. How are we doing there, Caitlin? Any questions?
Nope, not right now.
Okay. Constantly remove the excess paint from your brush. As you're adding more white, you're also, think about this, excuse me, you're picking up the green, the lime green, so you want to remove some of that excess lime green.
What number brush are you using? Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's fine. I'm using a number 6 round brush, a number 6, all the way down to like maybe a number 3 round brush is what I said would work for this size petal. You could, if you don't have a round brush, you could even use your liner brush. That would give you the same effect. You might have to change the pressure that you have with each stroke to make the daisy petal a little bit wider if you're using a liner brush. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink. Thank you. How many are actually painting with us tonight? If you're painting, let Caitlin know. Maybe you're not painting. Maybe you're just kind of watching along tonight. Let us know that too.
Yeah, I don't see an option that shows me how many people are here.
There are 180 around there.
Well, I'm glad you all chose to paint with me tonight, or at least to tune into the class tonight. If your paint is not drying and you're working along pretty quickly like I am, you might try doing 2 daisy petals at a time. I would not recommend that if your paint is setting up quickly. I know we all are from different parts of the country or different parts of the world, I should say. And I know some people live in a more arid climate. Maybe it's a little bit drier. Or folks that have ceiling fans on when you're painting, sometimes your paint might dry a little bit quicker. I'm here in these hot lights of the studio, but I'm used to painting fast, so I could probably do 2 daisies at a time. I would not try to do more than that because you don't want that green, the lime green undercoat to completely dry.
I'm just now seeing a comment. If you were going to paint pink daisies, would you still put green underneath?
No, I don't think I would. If you were doing a pink daisy, I think I would do maybe a darker pink under a very pastel pink.
Oh yeah, that would be pretty.
Uh-huh. I would stay with the pinks is what I probably would do. Pink daisies are so pretty. And it seems like a lot of repetition tonight, doesn't it? We're doing the same strokes over and over to kind of paint our daisies. Some of our daisies are kind of clustered near each other. I happen to be working in an area here that they're kind of overlapping. You can overlap one petal over a previously painted daisy. And I'm just working along to get all these daisies painted. I hope you're doing the same. This quick little touch press go is going to be the same kind of thing that we're going to do with our leaves and our greenery. Let's do another one here. The key thing I think to think about is making your daisy petals irregular. Each daisy should not look exactly like the daisy you previously painted. Your petals should be longer. Maybe some have more green in them. Some have more white to them. Some could be shorter. Have some overlap each other. When you look at if you by chance printed out the picture of tonight's project, when you look at what I originally painted, there's so many different irregularities in amongst the daisies. So you want them to look very irregular. It looks more like a real daisy that way. I have not cleaned my brush out since we started with the daisies. I just keep wiping off excess paint onto my paper towel. And I've about used up my little puddle of white paint, so I'm going to stop and get some more white paint out. So there's no need to get water in your brush at this point in time. And I've got 2 more here in the center. I'm going to go ahead and get my lime green on. I started on the right side of my heart and I did all those one at a time. When I got to the left side, I started working 2 daisies at a petal, or 2 daisy petals at a time, just to kind of speed things along a little bit. It's a touch, pull, lift, touch, pull, lift. By the end of tonight, if by chance you're a beginner and maybe this is a new stroke for you to learn to just touch, pull, and drag it, lifting it up all at the same time, you're going to be an expert because we're doing it so many different times, aren't we all?
When you get a chance, do you mind lifting up the painting so they can get a close-up of the petals?
Sure. Let me show you the finished one and then I'll show you the one I'm working on right now. The petals are all different shapes, different sizes, but they all start on the outside edge, stroking towards the center. Some are overlapping, some are greener than others, some are more white. Don't look at the daisy centers just yet, and some have more gaps between the petals. They're very free form. If you want to make, I did have right here at the tail end, I did have a little daisy bud thrown in here and there. There's one here, and then there's one right there. And you can see another one scooting in here. We can do a few daisy buds if you want to as well. I think the key thing though is to get your daisies in. And then I can show you how to do a couple daisy buds. I did those at the very, very end when I felt like I needed to fill in a little bit more between the leaves. So let's wait and get our leaves on. And if you want to go back and add a daisy bud, I'll tell you how to do that. And I think I've got mine pretty much on, but what I'm going to do right now is I am going to take a moment and I want to look at mine and really kind of study where I feel I might want to put another couple petals on some of the daisies that I've already painted. I don't want to fill in all of the gaps between my daisies, daisy petals, I should say, but maybe one needs to be more white. Maybe there's a little bit too much green in one of the daisies. So you can always come back and stroke a few more strokes with just the pure white this time. And like I said, you might want to fill in a gap. You might want to overstroke some of your green, make a stroke longer, maybe make a stroke shorter. Just kind of play with them for a moment. Don't dwell on them too long because like I said, they're really kind of free form little daisies. I'm just kind of playing with mine for a minute here, and then we're going to move on to our daisy centers real quickly. And a few more on a couple of my daisies. Oh yes, black-eyed Susans. I've painted those many, many a times. That is the state flower for Maryland. That would be so pretty to do a black-eyed Susan pattern here on the patriotic wreath. Maryland is such a beautiful state. I've been there several times. Had family live in Maryland for a while. All right, I think I've played around with my daisy petals enough. I'm happy with where I am with all of my daisies. What I'm going to do now is clean this brush out, this round brush. And I'm going to show you how I added some of these leaves here on our design. The leaves are all done with this same kind of stroke. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the that aside. I'm going to use the lime green and the Thicket. And I'll have both colors in my brush at the same time. And what I want to do is think about, I didn't have my marker here to draw for you, so I'll draw with my Thicket. We're going to start thinking about, like, here's our daisy. Maybe we'll want to have a leaf coming in towards the daisy. Maybe like a leaf right here. See how this leaf is coming in towards these two daisies. So we're going to start with like almost like a center vein, if you will. And then we're going to have both the lime green and the Thicket in our brush at the same time. And we're just going to do one long stroke. Then we'll come next to it, one long stroke, one long stroke, one long stroke. Same thing on this side, one long stroke, one long stroke, and one long stroke. That's basically all we're going to do for our leaves. So again, take a look at this one right here that I'm pointing to. We're going to start with kind of like that center stroke that's going to be like the vein leading into our daisies. And then we're going to put strokes on either side. You can even think about, if you wanted to, this one has a couple light ones. So there's more lime green in that than there is the Thicket. Some of them have more Thicket than the lime green. So as you pick up and reload your brush from time to time, some of your leaf is going to be darker than others. Here's a little section where I've got a lot of light of the lime green showing up in that leaf. So this is very hit or miss. It's very much your own decision. You can refer to your pattern if you want to, refer to the photograph you may have printed off of tonight's pattern. But this is really kind of willy-nilly, and you get to be your own florist to fill in your wreath. So think about putting in a leaf there. Maybe do a couple of these. Just kind of draw in some lines of where you want your leaves. Then come back and with your lime green and your thicket in your brush at the same time, we're going to do the same thing where we're touching down and pressing and pulling that whole stroke. This, I'm using my same round brush that we did their daisy petals with. And then we're going to add another little stroke next to it and another little stroke next to it and down till we get down to the daisies. And then we'll do the same thing on the opposite side, just little strokes pulling in. So there is what one of the leaf clusters could look like. So again, I'm just going to keep working, start at the top, and I'm going to use lime green and thicket in my brush at the same time. Thicket and lime green, and I'm just kind of making little strokes along the one long center line, then come back and add little strokes to the sides of that. So a daisy leaf, when you look at a daisy leaf, it often is very irregular and jagged on the outside. So this is kind of emulating a daisy leaf that is just every single which way. Lots of little sections to a daisy leaf.
And I'm sorry, which brush are you using again?
I am using my round brush, same brush that I did my daisy petals with. And you can put as many daisies leaves around as you want. I have quite a few on my finished piece here. I'll hold this a little bit closer here so that you can see. Put this in, I'll reach further for my palette. I have quite a bit of greenery intermixed with the daisies. So just wherever you feel you want to put in a little bit more green around your daisies, just add a little bit of strokes. And then some of these strokes could even, your leaf could even fall a little bit on top of the daisy. Yes, both greens in the brush at the same time. And like I said, when I do that, sometimes I'll stop and reload. Maybe I'll only reload one color. So if I'm looking like they're all getting very, very dark because of the thicket, I might come back and I might just put a little bit of lime green in my brush as I reload my brush. And I will go ahead and give myself that center curved vein. I'll go ahead and give myself the runway or the pattern, if you will, by just kind of drawing in or painting in some of these little vines first. So that way you kind of know where a leaf is going. You kind of know what direction you're going in. This is just simply touching and pressing down and lifting really quickly, but you're heading towards that center stroke, that center vein the whole time. So you're just making very irregular edged leaves. And add as many as you want. Like I said, you get to be your own little floral designer. Some of those leaves could be layered on top of your daisies. Some go inside the blue heart. Some fall outside of the blue heart. And I'm almost done with my greenery. I think I'll add some more here and there. And maybe a little bit coming down here in the very bottom, coming out that way. All right, let's talk about our daisy centers. I'm cleaning out that round brush. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pick up a very small little flat brush, like maybe a number 6 flat. So let's see if I've got one here. I do. A number 6 flat would be perfect. And I'm going to switch this around so I don't get into the green. So with my number 6 round brush, we have daisy centers right now that are painted in with our moon yellow. So let's load up some moon yellow in that number 6 flat brush across the full width of the flat brush. And then we're going to side load or dip a little corner of my apple red. So I'm going to bring some down here so it's closer to me here. And so I'm going to blend on the palette my moon yellow and apple red on one corner of the flat brush. As I'm loading it, that apple red is going to turn a little bit more orange because red and yellow make orange, right? So with the small number 6 flat brush, first loaded with the moon yellow, then side loaded with apple red, blended on the palette to become an orange on one side of the flat brush, with the orange to the flat brush and to the bottom of what we're going to consider each of these daisies. We're simply going to pat, or like here was our daisy center here, we're going to pat along the bottom edge. And it's very irregular, very rough, just patting. I'm not making a smooth floated line across there. The orange is going to be shading the bottom of each of our daisy centers. So again, it's the apple red and the moon yellow blended on the palette so that you have a brush that is part orange and part yellow. So that orange side of the brush is now going to be shading the base of a daisy. So I'll do this one right up here if you're watching. And I'm just keeping the brush flat on the daisy center, and I'm patting that orange along the base or the bottom of that daisy. So that's all we're doing right now. And that's a very quick little step. So you could do that on all of your daisies. Short little choppy strokes, just kind of blending. And you can change the direction of your flowers too. So maybe the bottom, what you're going to think of the bottom of your center is not always the bottom. Some of your daisies could be facing sideways. So it's just whatever you're thinking the bottom of the center is, you're going to just pat that little bit of an orange on. And when I say the bottom of the center, I'm thinking if you think of a face of a clock, I'm kind of patting that orange on anywhere from maybe 9 o'clock all the way down to 3 o'clock, or it could even be less wide than that. And it could be maybe from, let's say 7 o'clock to 5 o'clock. You're just putting color at the base of your daisy centers. So stop and reload your brush as you feel like you need to. If you've lost your intensity of the orange, add a little bit more red. Patting that on, very irregular. You want them to be a little different. And all of the daisy centers are done the same way. Go around the circle or go around the heart and do all of them. adding more and picking up more color as I go around my centers. There was a question there, Caitlin, but I didn't catch it in time. Something about shading.
Let me see. It says, so when you're trying to create shading with acrylics, you're loading 2 different colors of paint on your brush? Question mark.
That's one technique, yes. A lot of time, there's another technique called floating where you're not using 2 colors. I happen to feel like for beginners, working 2 colors in the brush at the same time is easier. That's the way I often teach. Unless you really know what you're doing when you're floating, it will not look as professional, let's say. All right, I've got all of my centers shaded with my moon yellow and apple red made to look like that orange. So what I'm going to do now is I'm cleaned out that number 6 flat brush. I'm going to load that brush again with just our moon yellow. This time I want to add some white to the top of those centers. So I'm going to side load with some of our white here. And the white edge of my brush is just going to tap on the top center areas of each of our daisies. I'm not doing a lot of shading. I'm just simply tapping. So I'll show you on my one I'm going to paint tonight. Again, using this daisy here as my sample. The white is to the top of my brush as I'm holding it. It's to the top of the center, and I'm just tapping. And see how that added just a little bit more life to the center of our daisies? That is white and moon yellow. And it's just a wiggly, jiggly little tap. It's not specific of where it's going. It's just mostly like at a top little corner. Maybe think about maybe somewhere between 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock. I'm just tapping on some white with the moon yellow in my brush, just brightening these daisy centers. And then remember, if you changed the direction of your daisy and some are going sideways, just remember where your darkness is. You're going across from that with where the white needs to go. All right. One more thing we're going to do to our daisy centers, and that are some little ditty dotties. And I'm going to hold my sample up for you so that you can see the little tiny dots. I'm using my stylus here to point. These little tiny dots that are on mostly the darkest side of the daisy center are just simply dots of our berry wine. You can use a dotting tool like a stylus. You can use, I would not use the handle end of your paintbrush unless you've got a very, very small, tiny handle of your paintbrush. But I'm going to use a liner brush, and I'm going to take water, and I'm going to bring some water here out onto my puddle, pull some of this berry wine off to the side, and I'm going to thin it down with water so that the dots will be real easy to make. And I'm just simply going to use a motion, kind of like a rapid fire motion. I'm using just the very tip of the brush onto the surface, and I'm going to rapidly take my brush and go up and down around this daisy center on the lower portion of the daisy center. Some of my dots are going to be in the center, surrounding the center. Some will fall out onto the daisy petals. Some will even go into the daisy center. By doing that real rapid little motion like this with the proper consistency of paint, you'll be able to do several little dots all at one time. If you use a dotting tool like a stylus, you'll get lots of little dots, but you'll find that you're going to have to reload your brush a lot more often than if you just use a liner brush. So again, the dotting tool is great, like using a stylus, but it will slow you down a little bit tonight. But if that doesn't bother you, then that's okay. Now look at how when we added on these two right here, we added the dots around the centers, how much more the centers came to life than the rest of our centers. So again, I'm using my liner brush. I've thinned my paint down. This is berry wine, our burgundy that we shaded the red stripes with. And I am just very rapidly moving. And I generally start about 9 o'clock, go around towards 6 o'clock, and then I stop about 3 o'clock again. Just rapidly adding little dots along the center, and it's the dark part of the center of our daisies. And these dots are very irregular in shape because I am using a rapid fire motion here by dotting. Some of my dots are going to be thicker than others because they've hit more pressure on the canvas. Some of them will be very faint because I had less pressure, or maybe it was at the end of a brush load and I had less paint in my brush. You want these dots to be very irregular. Like I said, some fall in the center around the daisy. Some actually fall out onto the petals. You want them very irregular, and it's just going to make it so much prettier. And you can turn your work. These dots are going to stay fresh for a while, so be careful not to get your fingers into them. Excuse me. I like to do daisies this way, and the daisy dot centers, I should say, this way. A lot of times people will use a dotting tool. It will just take you a little bit longer. And so I am almost done with my dots. So I just did irregular motions, and my paint is the right consistency that will flow from this liner brush very easily. So that's why I thinned it with a little bit of water first. And adding those dots here to my daisy centers just really kind of added a lot to my project. Now, our centers of our stars, if you worked around your stars like I did, you have white stars already because your canvas is white. If you need to add white stars, you can wait, let all of this dry if you want to, and transfer the pattern that I gave you to have your stars in the same size and shape that I did. If you'd rather do a free form star, by all means you can. You can paint them in. This is a piece of folk art. Don't worry about your stars being absolutely perfect. This is okay to just kind of willy-nilly put some stars in if you want. I'm not going to paint all of my stars here. I'm just going to paint a few of them. You could even let your white canvas be your star. But what you're going to do once you have your white stars in is you're going to take that same liner brush. You're going to thin down some of our darkest blue, which is our ink spot. So I'm going to add some water here over to my palette and pull some of that paint out. And what we're going to do, I'll show you on the finished sample here. We're just going to very carefully, but very freely outline our little stars. So when I outline a star, let me get one ready here. I've got my liner brush filled with some thin consistency. I added water to my paint. This again is my ink spot, and it's a liner brush. I'm going to start here in like the innermost point of the star, and I'm going to pull out towards the tip of a star. And I'll pull out on the other side towards the tip of the star. So when I'm doing a star, I'm going to start in the innermost part of the star and pull out. Same thing on the other side, pull out. So that I'm pulling out to these points that make up a star. Okay, if that makes sense. And I am going to hold my brush straight up and down so that just the tip of the brush is working along those edges. And I'll do a couple here for you. Remember, your daisy petals and your daisy dots are wet now, so you'll need to be up above your work, or take your hair dryer and hit them first and let them dry before you do this line work if you're not sure. Oh, I'm glad I just saw somebody said they really enjoyed this class. I'm glad you did. This is something that is just, like I said in the beginning, a very carefree painting. It's not meant to be overly perfect. It's something that's just like a piece of folk art. And I think this would be really pretty hanging on your front door for the holidays that you celebrate with red, white, and blue. This would be pretty worked up into a wreath, maybe a gallery wall if you do a lot of Americana decorating, red, white, and blue. This is just Patriotic Daisies. It's so fun. And like we've talked about earlier, this same pattern could be done in multiple different colors, multiple different designs.
And you can use a paint pen.
A paint pen to do this? If you must. I say if you must, because I'm an artist and I love teaching people how to use their liner brush. If you've painted with me before, you know the liner brush is one of my best friends, and I make people learn how to use their tools. But if by chance a paint pen works better for you or a marker works better for you, that's all right. I'm just teasing you, but I do want you to try learning to practice with your liner brush, because you'll find that it goes so much quicker. And it's all just small little straight lines because you're pulling from that innermost point to the outermost point when you're outlining each of your stars. Very, very not fussy, if you will. Simple and folk art kind of go hand in hand. You don't have to do a lot of fussing. Oops, there we go. And one more star. Whereas one more little step that we're going to add, and this could be optional. You don't necessarily have to add this, but I did on mine because I thought it just kind of added to our design a little bit. We have this beautiful blue center, and we have that blue shading around the outside edges. We have the blue outlining of our stars. If you want, one thing that you can add, and it just adds a little bit more of that intense deep blue, and that is our ink spot blue here. I used that small little flat brush that we were working with. I think it was a number 6 flat. If you want your leaves to be even smaller, you could go down to a number 2 flat. But if you look at mine here, you can see little triangles of 3 tiny little leaves that are kind of just act as filler, and they kind of fill in your design. Oh, we talked about daisy buds too. If you want to add a little daisy bud here and there, it's simply 3 strokes of the white, just like our petals, 3 stroking together in one direction. And then I added just a little bit of that green out on, starting from the bud base, and I pulled out on top of the white petals. And I didn't even worry about a stem. I just added little buds here and there if I felt like I needed a little filler. You may not decide you need the filler. Maybe you're fine with just adding these little blue leaves now. So to do the little leaves, go to a smaller flat brush. And like I said, you could use your number 6 flat if you want to. You could even go down to a number 2 flat. And you're just going to do 3 little leaves in a triangle fashion. So I'm going to start here at the base and just pull and lift. Start at the base, pull and lift. Start at the base, pull and lift. And so that's what I'm talking about. When I said the base, I'm starting here at the bottom of the leaf and pulling out towards the tip. They're not anything very special. They're just almost like a smush and pull and lift, a smush, pull and lift. And I did 3 of them in clusters. I did not bother with adding any veins or any lines. They're just filler. So if you want to add the extra blue filler, that would be your last step here to the class. And I would just add 1, 2, 3. And then maybe some coming into the blue of the heart. 1, well, you probably can't see them too far away. 1, 2, 3. It's just really a touch, smush, and lift. So let's add some more. Touch, smush, lift. Touch, smush, lift. Some of your leaves can be a little bit longer. Sometimes I make that center one a little bit longer. Touch, smush, lift. And let's make sure that we add some maybe going out onto our red stripes or our blue stripes too. Touch, smush, lift. Add as many of these little blue leaf clusters as you want. To me, it just was another little finishing touch, adding to the intensity of the blue to our design. This is, I think, if you could do it in a much slower pace, this is a great class. If any of you are teachers and you have students, or you think about the summer coming up and you've got children coming that are going to want to do some arts and crafts projects, this is something you can work with the kids, maybe not all in one setting, but they can all have a great time. So I think this is about all I have to offer you for Patriotic Daisies. Does anyone have any last minute questions?
It doesn't look like it.
Okay. Well, I hope that you all have enjoyed a wonderful time with us this evening. This is the class that we painted, Patriotic Daisies. And as we said in the beginning, Michaels has recorded this class. It will be uploaded to Michael's YouTube channel by tomorrow. So if you want to paint along with me on a second time, or maybe even the first time if you missed the class tonight, you'll find it there. I'm sorry.
Just kidding. One question.
Okay.
Is it rainproof if you hang it on the door?
Is it rainproof if you hang it on the door? Most doors have a little bit of a shelter or an awning or a porch to it, you'll be absolutely fine. If you worked with the same paints that I did tonight, which is the FolkArt multi-surface paints, these paints, besides designed to go on a multitude of surfaces, they dry to a beautiful satin finish, and there's a sealer formulated in this paint. So they will dry to a satin finish. It feels like there's a varnish already on it. And if you wanted to give it extra protection, you sure could give a light misting of a clear acrylic sealer, but you don't have to. But that would just give it a little bit more extra protection. I wouldn't put this directly out into the elements, but if you have a front door that has a little bit of shelter, I think you'd be actually fine with that. And then I just real quickly want to share with you our next Michaels class that's going to be held 2 weeks from tonight. Again, it will be a Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That would be May the 28th. Mark your calendars and register now, because Andy Jones will be sitting in this chair and he will be teaching retro mushrooms on a medium-sized wood cookie. So that's already uploaded on Michael's community classroom page, and you'll be able to find all the information for that class on May the 28th. Any last minute questions, Caitlin?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in and painting along with me this evening. I hope you all had a great time. Be sure and take a picture of your painting and share it using the hashtag Michaels Classes or Let's Paint Challenge. I invite you all to join our Let's Paint with Plaid Facebook group. It's a wonderful group where you're going to learn how to do all kinds of things. Lots of painting tips, tricks, and techniques are shared there. So until next time, thank you all for joining me this evening. Patriotic Daisies.